Okay, we're looking at the ministry of Jesus, and we're on page 8 of the study guide. And Heather has mentioned several things, and if it's redundant, just consider it reiterate, okay? And I don't think it'll hurt us to hear the same thing twice. But at the top of the page, we see where a mute demoniac was healed. And I want you to pay attention to the fact that sometimes a healing occurs by casting the devil out. But now you can't make a doctrine out of that to where everybody that's sick has a demon. And a lot of people go off of the deep end and go to the extremes on things. But there's various times in the scriptures to where we see the devil was cast out and a person was healed. And if you want to look in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 9, and beginning with verse 32, it says, as they went out, behold, they brought to him a dumb man possessed with the devil. Dumb means he couldn't talk. Okay, we throw that word around loosely. Okay, and when the devil was cast out, the dumb spoke, and the multitudes marveled, saying, it was never seen in Israel, never so seen in Israel. Okay, so this is Jesus is introducing them to something they've never seen before. The form of religion doesn't operate with the power of God. And what Israel had been exposed to was the form of religion through Judaism. And they'd heard all the teaching, but they hadn't seen anything of power, demonstration, I guess I could say. And when Jesus comes on the scene, it's totally different. Even his teaching is totally different. They said he's not teaching like the scribes. In other words, there was an inspiration on him. There was an authority with him. They said he teaches, like my paraphrase, like he knows what he's talking about. And a lot of people teach, but they don't know what they're talking about. They just teach a subject. But it's not the inspiration of God. It's coming out of the head, not out of the heart. They prepared a sermon instead of the Spirit of God speaking through them. You see the difference, and there's a world of difference in all that. But here, Matthew gives this account, and then in Luke 11:14, he also gives the same account. And I'm going to read that. There's a couple things we're going to look at, and I want to bring your attention to why it's so important to read all the Gospels and compare their narratives, because they do not contradict. I want to get that settled at the beginning. They do not contradict, they supplement. And if you want to get the full picture, you have to read all the Gospels. And in Luke chapter 11 and verse 14, it says, and he was casting out a devil, and it was dumb. And it came to pass, when the devil was gone out, the dumb spoke, and the people wondered. Well, the reason he was casting out the devil is because they brought this man to him for him to minister to. You get a little better picture of that. Think of it this way. If you have an accident or a crime committed or something like that, then the police officers are going to look for witnesses. They'll separate those witnesses, and they'll get each individual to tell in his or her own words what occurred. Then, in order to get the whole truth, hopefully, they take and compare all the notes, you understand, to get a more complete picture. And the bottom line is you could have 5 people giving you 5 reports, and they may all be telling the truth, but they may be telling you different things. this one seen something or wrote something up, the other didn't, or this one heard something, the other one didn't. And so when you approach the Gospels, you have to approach it that way when you're reading the various things, concerning the life and ministry of Jesus, the parables of Jesus, teachings of Jesus, this type thing. If you don't put all these together, you don't get a complete understanding of what's actually being said. And so Matthew had a perspective, Mark had a perspective, Luke had a perspective, and John had a perspective. And it's not contradictory, again, okay? It's not contradictory, but it's supplementary. So we put all these together. Then we see there was a man with a withered hand healed through the ministry of Jesus. And this is in Matthew chapter 12. And beginning with verse 9, it says, but he who, let me get some help here, okay? It'd help if I'd get in Matthew instead of Luke. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 9. We'll get it right in a minute. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 9. It says, and when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man who had his hand withered, and they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him? And he said to them, what man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath day. Then he said to the man, stretch forth your hand, and he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole, like as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. Now that's interesting. Here you would think they would be rejoicing over this phenomenal event that has occurred, and instead of rejoicing in the man's healing, they'd rather for the man not to be healed, and now they're plotting against Jesus, what they can do with him. And you see this same narrative in Mark chapter 3. Beginning with verse 1, he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there who had a withered hand, and they watched him, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. Now see, he's given us some insight we didn't get with the other. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, stand forth. And he said to them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. And when he looked around about on them, note this, with anger. You didn't get that with Matthew, did you? Being grieved for the hardness of their heart, he said to the man, stretch forth your hand, and he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as the other. And then, of course, you can go on reading, and they sought counsel there also how to destroy him. Then if you look at Luke 6, beginning with verse 6, it says, and it came to pass also on another Sabbath that he entered into the synagogue and taught. And there was a man whose right hand was withered. Now we know it was his right hand, don't we? And the scribes and the Pharisees watched whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might find an accusation against him. But he knew their thoughts. Now we're getting some other information, okay? And said to the man who had the withered hand, rise up, stand forth in the midst. And he arose and stood forth. Then Jesus said to them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? And looking round about upon them all, he said to the man, stretch forth your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. And they were filled with madness and communed one with another what they might do to Jesus. Now here again, it's amazing how we can get so caught up in the letter of the law that we miss the spirit. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're thinking only letter. You can't do any physical labor on the Sabbath day, yet they could water their animals. Or if an animal fell in a pit or whatever, they could get that animal out. In other words, it's convenient stuff. You with me? But when it comes to the spiritual stuff, they're blind as a bat. They don't know anything about the Spirit of God. And so they're opposing Jesus, not knowing what this is all about. And he calls them on it. Is it right to do good or do evil on the Sabbath? This is not the only time that this happens, that he's confronted by doing a healing on the Sabbath day. But he gets their attention first. Now the bottom line is they can't deny that what he did was right, so what do? You have to get the person out of the way. So they start plotting how they can get rid of this man. In other words, he's messing up our doctrines and our theory. So we've got to get rid of him. He's making us look bad, is the essence of it. That same mindset still goes on today in the form of religion. It's amazing to me. People would rather for a person to get sick and die so it doesn't mess up their doctrine than to see the power of God demonstrated and a person healed. That still goes on today, you understand. Then when we get to Matthew chapter 12, we see that there's a blind and mute demoniac healed. I'll turn back to Matthew this time. And let's look at Matthew 12, beginning with verse 9. And when he was departed from there, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man. Well, I'm at the wrong place. Matthew 12:22. And then was brought to him one possessed with a devil, blind and dumb. And he healed him, inasmuch as the blind and the dumb both spoke and saw. Do you see where the devil was bringing about this problem? But yet he says he healed him by restoring his sight, obviously, and by restoring his speech to him. Now, Matthew is the only one that records this. He recorded something the others overlooked. Now, we know from John that they didn't record everything that Jesus did. John said if all the things he did had been recorded in books, he didn't know that the world could contain it all. So in 3.5 years, Jesus did a ton of ministry. You with me? So what they're hitting is basically highlights. God is moving on them to record what you and I need. You don't have to have every healing. He's showing us principle. He's showing us how this thing works. And you'll find that Jesus didn't heal the same way every time. It's not a canned program. This is why we have to listen to the Spirit. Now, you have to remember that Jesus said he always did what he saw his Father do. So when you're thinking about the ministry of Jesus, understand that he is doing exactly what the Father said. In other words, he is being led by the Spirit. That's why in different settings he's operating different ways. Just like with blind people, he didn't heal them all the same way. You with me? Or with deaf people. And yet I've seen it. People try to make a doctrine out of it. The only way you go get a deaf man healed is stick your fingers in his ears and pop them out real fast. And I mean, all this is foolish. You have to listen to the Spirit of God and move with what the Spirit of God's given you. In Matthew chapter 15, we see where this Syrophoenician woman, Canaanite, who comes to Jesus in behalf of her daughter who's demon-possessed. And because she's not a Jew, he's not paying any attention to her. He came for the lost sheep, or he came for the Jews, the Israelites, you understand. And so this woman could have taken offense, but she chose not to. She wanted her daughter delivered. And so if you start reading with verse 21, it says, Then Jesus went from there and departed into the coast of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast and cried to him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with a devil. But he did not answer a word. In other words, he didn't even reply to her. He ignored her, if you will. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, she cries after us. In other words, tell her to go away, she's aggravating us now. That's the essence of it. But he answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. In other words, I came for the Jew. Okay? Then she came and worshiped him. She's not taking offense, you with me? And said, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, It is not proper to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. Well, she could take an offense there. You know, Gentiles were viewed as dogs, okay? And she said, that's true. She agreed with him. Yet, the dogs eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. You hear what she said? I'm not asking you to take anything away from the Jews. All I want is what the Jews are not taking. You follow that? Then Jesus said to her, Woman, great is your faith. So, what does he do? Be it unto you, even as you will. So whose faith is that? It's the woman's faith, right? And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. Now that's the way Matthew gives the account. Then let's go over to Mark chapter 7 and see how he looks at this. Mark chapter 7, beginning with verse 24. And from there he arose and went into the borders of Tyre and Sidon and entered into a house and would have no one to know it, but it could not be hidden. In other words, he really wants some seclusion at this time, okay? For a certain woman whose daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by nation. And she besought him that he would cast forth the devil out of her daughter. Now we know from Matthew that that's from Cana, okay? Then Jesus said to her, Let the children first be filled, for it is not proper to take the children's bread and to cast it to the dogs. And she answered and said to him, Yes, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. And he said to her, For this saying, go your way, the devil's gone out of your daughter. Now, see, Mark is not telling us that Jesus has said, Woman, great is your faith. Are you with me? Matthew brings that in. So we put it all together. And when she was come to her house, she found the devil gone out and her daughter laid upon the bed. Now, Mark's telling us something that Matthew didn't tell us, right? And so this girl is cured by casting the devil out of her, right? Then look at Matthew 17. We're going to be going back and forth. You guys have an advantage. You're looking at it on the board. I'm having to turn to it, okay? But Matthew chapter 17, and we'll begin with verse 14, where this is evidently an epileptic, okay? And when they were come to the multitude, there came to him a certain man kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic. Moonstruck is what that literally means. And sore vexed, for oftentimes he falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation. Now, I'm going to say it the way the Greek says it. How long am I to put up with you? Bring him to me. And Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Now, I'm going to go on reading here because I want to bring out something. Then the disciples came to Jesus and said, Why could we not cast the devil out? Now here's the answer, cut and dried. Jesus said to them, Because of your unbelief. Why could they not cast the devil out? Because of their unbelief. Now, I want you to keep the context, and this will enlighten you if you just keep the context. Verily I say unto you that if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, remove from here to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible to you. Howbeit this kind goes not out but by prayer and fasting. What's the subject? Faith. Not the devil. The subject's faith. This kind of faith is a result of prayer and fasting. And people say, you have to fast certain devils out. No. You cast the devil out, you don't fast them out. Mark 16 tells us to cast them out, right? But the faith is the issue. Now, he had sent them out, his disciples, his apostles. Jesus had sent them out, Matthew 9, where he sent them out and commissioned them to cast out devils, any kind of devil. What's the problem here? Lack of faith. In other words, they've run into something they haven't run into before, and because it's not working like it's worked previously, they're getting frustrated. And when you get frustrated, faith won't operate. You understand? And so this is Matthew's rendering. Let's look at Mark chapter 9. And this is why I say you have to put it all together. You can't pick and choose. If a preacher believes a certain way, he may choose one of the Gospels that's left something out so he can teach it that way. Tell the truth. Put it all together. And so when you look at Mark chapter 9 and verse 14, it says, and when he came to his disciples, he saw a great multitude about them, and the scribes questioning with them. And immediately all the people, when they beheld him, were greatly amazed, and running to him, saluted him. Now, if you know the setting of this, he has just come down from the mountain where he was transfigured with Peter, James, and John, okay? And he asked the scribes, what are you questioning my apostles about? Okay? So he takes the responsibility, okay? And one of the multitude answered, said, Master, I brought unto you my son, who has a dumb spirit. And wherever he takes him, he tears him, and he foams, and he gnashes with his teeth, and he pines away. And I spoke to your disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. Not lack of power, lack of faith. You with me? And he answered him and said, O faithless generation, not powerless, how long shall I be with you? How long will I put up with you? Bring him to me. And they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit tore him. Now, the devil will try to intimidate you. And that was probably what's going on with the disciples, but he's not intimidating Jesus, you understand. And if you look at Jesus' approach, it's really very interesting. And he fell on the ground and wallowed foaming. In other words, this is something out of the ordinary that's occurring. And Jesus asked his father, how long has this been going on? He's not paying any attention to the devil. You follow me? And the father said from the time he was a child. And oftentimes it's cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Now here again you have to look at Jesus' reply. What's he doing? He's trying to put the responsibility all on Jesus. But Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Can you believe? Don't just say, can I do? Can you believe? Do you believe I can do it? Now, understand this man's had a bad experience because he did bring them to the apostles and they didn't cast the devil out, so no doubt he's wavering a little bit. You understand? And it says, immediately the father of the child cried out and said, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Now, a lot of people take this scripture and try to use that as a cop-out for lack of faith, okay? The man was believing as far as he knew how to believe. You with me? Believe as far as you know how to believe. Get into the Word. Get the Word in you to where you know what the will of God is. If I can go back and restate this, the man says, if you can. Now allow me to paraphrase. Jesus says it's not a matter of whether I can. That's not even a question. Can you? I have the power. Do you have faith? You follow me? And this is the way a lot of people come to be ministered. If you can, do something. It's not a matter of is the power of God on me. Can you believe that? Can you receive that? We must learn this, that we play a vital role in what occurs. You with me? So faith and power connecting. It says when Jesus saw the people come running together, he rebuked the foul spirit and said to him, you dumb and deaf spirit, I charge you to come out of him and enter no more into him. So here again, I believe word of knowledge is operating in this. He knows what he's dealing with. A deaf and dumb spirit. Now, normally you wouldn't think of a deaf and dumb spirit. Deaf would be you can't hear, dumb be you can't speak. What does that have to do with the violence that was occurring to this boy? It's like epileptic seizures or something that's causing this, but yet it's a deaf and dumb spirit that's doing that. That interests me just in looking at that. Now, actually all four record this. Let's look at Luke chapter 9, all four gospel writers I should say. Let's look at Luke chapter 9 and begin with verse 37. And it came to pass that on the next day of what? When he was transfigured, when they were come down from the hill or mountain, that many people met him. And behold, a man of the company cried out, saying, Master, I beseech you, look upon my son, for he is my only son. Now Mark is giving us something that Matthew and Luke is not. Mark is letting us know that they're being questioned by the scribes. Okay? And he says, lo, a spirit takes him, and he suddenly cries out, and it tears him so that he foams again, and bruising him hardly departs from him. In other words, this thing was taking a physical toll on this boy. And he said, I besought your disciples to cast him out, and they could not. And Jesus answering said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you and put up with you? Bring the son here. And as he was yet coming, the devil threw him down and tore him, and Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit and healed the child. Cured him. Okay? And delivered him again to his father. And they were all amazed at the mighty power of God, but while they wondered, everyone at those things which Jesus did, he said to his disciples, let these sayings sink down into your ears. And then he goes on and talks about the Son of Man shall be delivered into the hands of men. Okay? Now, let's look at John chapter 14. Get the page to turn here. John chapter 14 and verse 9. That's not right. I'm in the wrong. I've got a wrong reference right there. Let's scratch that reference from your study guide. That's a wrong reference, okay? We can make a mistake if we try hard. All right, let's look at Bartimaeus in Matthew chapter 20. And most people refer to him as blind Bartimaeus, and that's how I used to always refer to him till Jane rebuked me and said once he got healed, he wasn't blind. And so Bartimaeus that used to be blind, okay? In Matthew chapter 20, beginning with verse 29, it says, as they departed from Jericho, a great multitude followed him, and behold, now note what Matthew says, 2 blind men sitting by the wayside. 2 blind men. And when they heard that Jesus passed by, cried out, saying, have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. And the multitude rebuked them because they should hold their peace. In other words, be quiet, don't disturb anything. We don't care if you're blind or not. That's my paraphrase. You understand how this is? There's no compassion in the crowd. You have not because you ask not. They're asking. They're crying out. Okay? And they were told to be quiet, and they just said, have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. In other words, they're not shutting up. They have an agenda. They want to be healed. Jesus stood still and called them and said, what do you want me to do to you? Or what do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Lord, that our eyes be open. Now, do you think Jesus didn't know they were blind? So why would he ask a question like that? Never assume anything. Be specific. Okay, so Jesus is getting specific here. And Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. Now, that's Matthew's account. Let's look at Mark's account in the 10th chapter of Mark. Mark chapter 10, beginning with verse 46. It says, as they came to Jericho, and as he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great number of people, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the highway side begging. Now, evidently, Mark knew who this was. He may not have known who the other was. He's just singling this man out. It doesn't mean there wasn't 2. He's just singling out Bartimaeus, okay? And they were on by the side of the highway begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And many charged him that he should hold his peace, but he cried the more a great deal. I like that. They said, shut up, and he's saying, I'm not shutting up, I'm getting louder. You with me? I want his attention. Don't give up when people try to suppress it. You want the attention of God pressed through the crowd. Don't pay any attention to the crowd. Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. And when they called the blind man, saying to him, be of good comfort, rise, he calls you. Now all of a sudden they've changed their mind. How fickle people are. Jesus answered and said to him, what do you want me to do to you or for you? And the blind man said to him, Lord, that I might receive my sight. And Jesus said to him, now listen to this, go your way, your faith made you whole. You don't get that out of Matthew. Right? That's why you have to put it all together. Your faith made you whole, and immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus in the way. Then look at Luke chapter 18. And let's begin with verse 35, Luke chapter 18. And it came to pass that as he was come near to Jericho, a certain blind man sat by the wayside begging. And here again, Luke's talking about one. Matthew talked about two. Mark talked about one and called him by name. And hearing the multitude pass by, he asked what it meant, and they told him that Jesus of Nazareth passes by. And he cried, saying, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And those who went before him, those who were going before Jesus, are the ones that actually rebuked him, that he should hold his peace. It's amazing how the entourage that goes before you can prevent what you're wanting to do. But he cried so much the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he was come near, he asked him, saying, what do you want me to do for you? And he said, Lord, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith saved you. Now, that's not talking about being born again. What it's talking about is your faith saved your eyes. Okay? That's the salvation. That's the deliverance. That's the rescue that has taken place. And immediately received his sight and followed him, note this, glorifying God. We get a little extra here from Luke. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. Now, we'll stop there because our time's up, but I want you to understand you have to put all the Gospels together in order to get the truth. You with me? Because different ones will say different things. Like, how does this come out? By fasting. By prayer and fasting. People just assume that he's talking about the devil. No, he's talking about faith. He answered the question because of your unbelief. Let's read all of it and let's get the whole story.